There was a nurse in a small village in Poland in the post-World War I era who was very good to the people in the town. She really loved the people because she was loved in return. And even though she was a little different from the rest of the people because she was of a different religion, most of the people in this town were Catholic, she was Quaker. And maybe they didn't quite see eye to eye on certain religious things. She still was able to care for them and minister to them in a beautiful, Christ-like manner. One day, sadly, she passed away and she died, and the people wondered, well, where are we going to bury her? Because she was of another faith background, there was only one cemetery in the town, and it was a Catholic cemetery. And so they went to the priest in the town and they said, Father, can we bury her there in the Catholic cemetery? And he said, well, she's not Catholic. I'm not really sure. How about this? Why don't we kind of compromise, and how about you can bury her just outside of the fence, outside the gate of the cemetery? And they were like, okay. So the day for her funeral came, and all had seemed pretty quiet before this. All seemed pretty quiet, like there wasn't a whole lot of efforts or whatnot or anything different going on. But they noticed that they had started to dig the hole a few days before for her outside the fence. But they noticed that morning when the priest went out, he was shocked because all of a sudden, that hole that was dug for her grave outside the fence was now included in the cemetery. And it was because the fence was moved. Because in the middle of the night, the people of the village went out and they said, you know what? She deserves to be buried with us in our gates, in our community, because she loved and because she knew how to love and be loved. I think there's a good message in that, and it goes along with our gospel reading today because Jesus is speaking about inclusivity. Not exclusivity, but he's talking about being inclusive. You see, the apostles, the 12, were walking along, and they see somebody doing things in Jesus' name, but he wasn't part of their club. He wasn't part of their group, one of the 12. And so they were highly concerned, and they went to him, Jesus, how is it that this person's doing things in your name? Shouldn't we rebuke him? And actually the opposite happened. Jesus rebuked them because he said, this person's doing good works in my name. Don't deny them that opportunity to do good. Rather, include them, have them follow as well. You see, the disciples were kind of hung up and perhaps were becoming like some of the Hebrew leaders, the religious leaders of the time that Jesus spoke about, where they wore long tassels and took places of honor. Jesus wanted to make sure that his group, that the apostles, that this new way of faith was going to be different. Wasn't going to follow that kind of tradition which was kind of dark. That really they were all equal. They were called to embrace others, not separate themselves from others. So Jesus encourages them, no, go and include this person because he's doing good works. Don't push them off to the side because this person might be different than us. And you see, I think that's why the Pope at this time is also probably getting a lot of attention. I'm sure you've probably seen maybe a little bit of the coverage these last days. I think he's had pretty good coverage overall. A lot of people interested, kind of surprised. Some channels, news channels that I would think would have absolutely no interest in religion have even been covering him and not talking over him either, kind of letting him give his own message. It's kind of admirable, actually. I don't think anybody else in the world could have that kind of audience. He's really been welcomed here, welcomed in places that we probably never even thought possible. Welcome, and he was not afraid. He accepted the invitation to go and to address a joint session of Congress. I think he actually brought peace into that room where there's often a lot of chaos. That was something really very beautiful to see, that in the midst of really a very political, bipartisan kind of system that we have, that somebody could come in and address issues in a way, very brilliantly actually, where you knew what his point was, but I think everybody thought, wow, isn't he wonderful? And they weren't like arguing about anything either. I thought it was beautiful how he walked out there on the balcony of the Capitol building. There in Washington, a place that's obviously very dear to us as Americans. It kind of reminded me of how he walks out on the balcony at St. Peter's and gets a beautiful view of the city of Rome. I think also he was very embraced there in New York, and very moving to see him with leaders of other faith traditions. It's really along the lines of the gospel today. All together, all believers in God. To hear someone singing in Hebrew, maybe if you watched it or heard it or saw it afterwards, it was really quite magnificent. To realize we're all worshiping one God. The Pope has a nice charisma about him, but he's also able to give of himself, and people appreciate that. I think he's giving an example of being Christ-like, because he's looking beyond what somebody looks like, where they're from, what their ideology may be, what they smell like, what their culture is. It does not matter to him. He really wants the best for all of humanity. These are days that we really can celebrate being Catholic, because the leader of our faith really has, again, had a beautiful visit here in our country. Now, it's not without criticism, but I think we have to be careful when, we hear or read about the Pope being criticized, for instance, like, well, what's he doing talking about climate change? Well, I assure you, he's not saying anything new. There's nothing new about Genesis, where it said to take the earth, care, and cultivate it. There's nothing new about immigration. It's kind of a hot topic today for many people. Really a different type of topic, because, it's one that maybe we all can relate to, as the Holy Father himself said, we're all immigrants. We've come from another place. Maybe 100 years ago when my family came into this country, the system didn't have computers, as much bureaucracy, and maybe some oppression as it perhaps does today. I think that's what he's trying to look at and say, look, this is a system that needs reformed. This is something that needs to be changed. And we have to see the human person, the human being who is there on the forms, not just a number. We look beyond that because we see all of humanity. The Holy Father is able to, speak about issues in a way that I think people are listening. I think we could say he's moving the fence. Please, don't worry. He's not compromising the dirt or the property. In no way is he doing that. He's very orthodox, very much a lover of the gift of life, of a relationship with God. But he's really doing something which is extraordinary in our modern world, and people are listening. We should give thanks for that. And maybe it's a chance for us also to think in our own life, do we need to move the fence? Do we need maybe to be a little more inclusive in our own life when it comes to our own ideologies with people, with maybe certain cultures? Do we need to be a little bit more open, seeing humanity and the goodness of humanity, as opposed to always seeing the things that are wrong? How can we be maybe more Christ-like in our own minds, but also in our own actions too? If we truly are going to be disciples, we have to realize people are watching us. If we say we are Catholic, what witness are we giving? Not just coming to church once a week or during the week. What witness do we give all the time? Are we willing to build bridges with maybe even people who we have differences with in our own personal life? We may find it kind of freeing to move the fence, to let go of some of the things in our life where we have issues with people, because I assure you, the devils dance when we do their work. And I don't think we want to do the devil's work in carrying on perhaps hatred or having issues, not extending reconciliation. Why make the devil happy? We want to make Christ happy. I think we make the Lord happy when we expand our horizons. Maybe when we even look and say, how can we have a dialogue about certain issues, which is what Pope Francis is doing in the example of what Jesus did, as opposed to being closed. Maybe we're not willing to move the fence, but are we at least willing to open up a gate? Maybe to allow God into our relationships, maybe allow God into all that we do. See, our job is not to change God. Our job is for God to change and be open to Him changing us. And when we do that, I can assure you, incredible things will happen. And one day, the most incredible of all is being not worried about where we're buried, because that's really insignificant. What's more important is that we are a part of God's family for all eternity as a saint in heaven.